Good morning. We'll get started with chapter 3, which is on international logistics infrastructure. In this slide, we'll see what are the different infrastructure requirements for logistics activities, not only within United States but in other parts of the world. By infrastructure, we not only mean roads and highways or ports, but there are other um, components of the infrastructure which are required for smooth flow of goods, smooth flow of information, storage of goods, and other activities which are related with logistics. So let us get started with this chapter 3, which is on logistics infrastructure. In this chapter, we'll try to understand what this infrastructure is and what are the different types of infrastructure. This slide shows the different components or elements of that infrastructure. The different component includes transportation, communication, public utilities, banking services, business services, distribution channel, court system, intellectual property, and existence of standards. Now we'll look into each of these elements or components of logistics infrastructure one by one. So we'll first get started with the transportation infrastructure, and we will discuss each of these as well. Now, transportation infrastructure is probably the most important component of logistics infrastructure because that is what makes the goods move efficiently and smoothly from point A to point B. Transportation infrastructure includes both seaports, airports, railways, and roads. So this is the most important, I would say, the transportation infrastructure. And of course, more and more communication infrastructure is becoming important. Like how well the different players in the supply chain are connected with one another. My phone line, cell phone, internet, mail, and so on. So this is what is the communication infrastructure. Utilities like water, electricity, energy, the sewer system, those are components of the utility infrastructure. Banking infrastructure for the smooth operation and setting up of logistic facilities, there is requirement of fund. Now the fund comes from the banking infrastructure. For different countries, the regulations are different. The ceiling for the loan available from the banks are different. The time required for the application to mature is different. So that is the banking infrastructure. Business service infrastructure includes freight forwarders, couriers, the carriers, delivery service providers, and so on. Distribution system includes the existing market channel or marketing channel, the promotion of products, what is available. So when a company enters a new country or a new area, they try to piggyback on the existing distribution infrastructure. So that's important. If it is not there, then it becomes a greenfield project, which is enormously time consuming, and economically that may not be viable. Court infrastructure, if there is some problem between two parties in the supply chain, or between a supplier and a supplier and a client or a vendor, then the courts are required to resolve that issue. So that's important. Intellectual property, if you franchise your intellectual property to someone who will be using it, so how much safe it is, how much the law, intellectual property law, safeguard your intellectual property, that's important. And standard infrastructure, which includes safety, design safety, performance standard, and so on. Again, different countries has got different safety standards. Again, we will discuss all of these in greater details. As far as the port infrastructure is concerned, there are different aspects to a port infrastructure. Some of them are the water draft. So, what is the draft? If you have a ship which is standing there in the port, it requires a minimum depth. Now, this picture shows the Miami port. We see over here those cranes. These are the cranes. Okay, we see that the hinterland we need huge area for storing the container. Now, the ship will require some draft. So that's what we talked about. One which is under the water or inside the water. That's the draft. Okay. Now, each of these ports will have their own operating procedure, operating hours, how many days of the week it will be working, the connectivity of the port to the hinterland, those are important. This is another very important port. It is the Paragon terminal in Rotterdam. Over here we see cranes, but one interesting thing is we see these cranes here, but we see cranes from two direction. This is important when the ship is wide so that the cranes cannot reach the other end. The other advantage with cranes from both direction is loading becomes faster and it is safer so that the stability of the ship is not affected. This figure shows the Panama Canal. We'll have a detailed discussion on the Panama Canal later on, but this figure shows that there are two canals. Actually, now there are two more canals which are being added, and there are the log gates. If you can see in this figure, these are the log gates. The Panama Canal flows above the water level. It basically connects the Atlantic and the Pacific, and the water level is higher than the ocean level. So water has to be pumped in from the nearby lake and reservoir. The ships enter and they passes this log gates, and then finally it is lowered back on the other end. So that's the way the Panama Canal works. There's a YouTube link. You can watch it on your own and see how this operates. Uh, the other thing which is worth mentioning, that there is very little gap between the side of the canal and the ship. So what they do, they switch off the engine of the ship, and they use tugboats, or actually not tugboat but tug engines, to pull the ship across the channel. So that's the way it operates. This shows the Suez Canal. Again, like the Panama Canal, this is another very important uh, canal which connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea through the Isthmus of Suez. Um, the only problem with both these canals is the size of the ships are getting bigger. So initially, when it was built, the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal, they are meant for a specific size of the ship or specific width. But as the ships have become bigger, they're increasingly becoming difficult to cross this canal. So if the ship cannot cross this canal, they have to move all the way across African continent. If I draw a rough sketch of the African continent, what happens, so instead of say crossing over, they have to move all the way across the Cape of Good Hope, which is the tip of Africa, and then move to the Asian countries. So that's a much longer route. Uh, and we should understand expansion of this canal or widening of this canal is an enormous task. So uh, it becomes difficult for one single country to do that. Now the Panama Canal expansion which is taking place, it is done by a consortium of different companies who are doing the dredging, the concreting, and all those work. Again, you can go to their website to get better understanding of what's going on there. This shows the Corinth Canal in Greece. Again, the canal connects the Gulf of Corinth with the Saronic Gulf in the Aegean Sea. Again, these are all engineering marvels. But one biggest difficulty with all these canals, again, the width. There is a restriction of on the size of the ship which can cross this canal. Now for airport, different features of the airport are runways. Um, how many runways an airport has will determine how many planes they can handle. Space, um, the space around the airport is important because that allows possibility for expansion, that allows possibility of bigger flights to enter because of the noise pollution. Hours of operation, again, that is guided by the noise pollution level. Warehouse space, that's important around the airport. We see that in Kopel area there are huge number of warehouses, and they're specifically catered to the need of the airports. So those are some of the infrastructures which are associated with airport logistics. This is the Kai Tak airport in Hong Kong. Again, it is closed now. The problem with that airport, because it was within a very closely populated urban area, and because of the noise pollution, many planes were not allowed to land uh, at certain hours of the day. So, and that's problem. So they had to close and open up a airport which is further away from the urban population. That's the Cheklap Kok Airport in Hong Kong. That's location wise that's better because it provides more open space. It is at a distance from the urban population, so that the noise pollution problems is much less here. Railroad. For railroad, what is important is the gauge. So if I draw a cross section of the track, say this is one track, and they sit on sleepers. So, sorry, this is a sleeper here. Now, this distance between the two rails, the two inner parts of the rail, that determines the axle width. So when the rail basically sits, it sits something like that. That's the wheel. Okay, so that's the wheel. Different countries has intentionally kept different gauges so that enemy trains cannot enter. Like in Europe, they had different gauges all over, so that a train from Germany may not enter France, or from between France and Belgium, and so on. But now they're trying to have more uniform gauges so that it becomes convenient to move the trains. Multimodal is the cargo train has shifted from traditional rail car to multimodal cars, which carry containers or truck trailers. So it is called container on flat car or trailer on flat car. Then comes the concept of land bridge. Land bridge which connects two pieces of water, that's a land bridge. I think we have discussed that previously. The dual gauge track, that's available, or that's practiced in some countries like Brazil. So if you see over here, this is a pair of track. So that's the gauge. The other gauge would be this one, between that and that. So two gauges of train can move in this track. So that's why it's called the dual gauge train, or dual gauge track, not dual gauge train. And it basically allows two gauges of train on that. The double stack rail cars, which you will see in US, that has tremendously impacted the capacity of the railroad. Basically, it has doubled. So the train which connects, the land bridge which connects, say, the west coast with the east coast, their capacity has doubled because of these double stack trains. But this is not possible in many European countries because they have overhead electric wires, because the engines over there are run on electricity and they have electric wires. So this double gauge is not possible. For road infrastructure, there is the quality. Some roads are better quality than the other. Congestion is a big issue in many countries. Civil engineering structures like bridges and tunnels are part of these road infrastructure. Okay, so again, this is very much intuitive. I don't think this requires much explanation. Traffic congestion is an issue in many of the developing countries and underdeveloped countries. It might take hours to reach from one point in the city to another. So this is a big problem as far as logistics of freight movement is concerned in some of those countries. Some of the bridges are engineering marvel. This bridge in southern France is a example of that. Again, the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is an example of that as well. So many of the civil engineering bridges or civil engineering infrastructure has revolutionized the freight movement in many countries and improved the logistics manifold. The mail service, which includes speed, reliability, delay, competition. Now here in US we have the USPS, FedEx, UPS. DHL is not that big here in US. Actually, they have stopped, I think, the domestic operation. It's mostly overseas operation. That's what they do now, DHL. But DHL is big in other parts of the world. So those do affect the logistics in many countries, because uh, many companies, what they do, they outsource the logistics activities to some of these companies. The speed, reliability of the mail service, that's also important as well. In unlike US, where it is mostly road network um, which is used for mail services, and maybe the air freight, the high-speed train in the European countries do serve as a um, very important mode of transport for mail delivery. Um, in US, probably the railroad network is not as robust as that in Europe. Telecommunication, which includes landline, we all know that the landline is decreasing now. Many of the households doesn't even have a landline now. Cell phone, which is increasing again, it has increased in other parts of the world more compared to that of US. There is a phenomena which is called the leapfrogging. The leapfrogging phenomena um, means that in many of the developing countries which did not have landline, because they didn't have probably enough money to set up the infrastructure for the laying the cables and stuff, what they did, they, instead of going from no phone to landline and then to cell phone, they jumped over to cell phone. So that's called leapfrogging. So they haven't gone through the stage of landline. They missed that altogether. And of course, internet. Um, in US, most part of the country is connected. The speed may not be uniform, but still they do have, there is internet access in most part of the country. Other Asian countries are also catching up, and speed reliability might be an issue in some of those countries. The landline phone penetration, we see that US is number 16. Okay, so there are countries, many of the European countries, they have higher landline penetration, like Switzerland, Germany. Um, that's possible maybe because of the size of the country. United States, land-wise, it's so much bigger than those European countries. They're much smaller. Okay. Now, cell phone penetration, again, US is below many of the countries. It stands at 83% penetration, where countries like UAE, it has 158% penetration. What that means is for every individual, on the average, they have around 1.5 cell phones. So 1.5 cell phone for every individual on the average. Now this is an average. So if you see over here, many of the developing countries, they have more cell phone users than United States. Again, I really don't know how to justify that, because many of the countries, their per capita income is much less compared to Europe, compared to US, but their cell phone uses is much more. That may be because the cost of service is much lower there. That's why people can afford to use more cell phone compared to United States. Again, this is an old data, so this is from 2008. Now things might have changed little bit here and there. Telecommunication service. So, um, unlike US, many of the utility services are exposed to the population. Like we see over here, the telecommunication line, and they are taken overhead, so it's visible, and which is not really um, safe. It's not really aesthetically good, but still they have that. And as I said, like um, because of these issues, they have gone to that leapfrogging phenomena, that from no line or no cell phone or no landline, they have moved to cell phone. So that's what they have done. So from no, they have jumped to cell phone. So they did not go through landline. So this is missing in many parts of the world. The other utilities includes electricity, water and sewer, energy, theft. So how much protection the government, the administration can give to companies to prevent theft, that's also important, because that has an impact on the profit. If the port areas are not safe, if the mail service is not safe, um, that affects the efficiency and the profit margin of the company. Again, this picture shows a pipeline, the Russian European pipeline. This goes through Ukraine, and recently it happened, or not recently, actually a few years back, it happened that Russia said they will stop their connection to the Ukraine and East European countries. Now, many of these East European countries relies on Russia for that power. So if this is stopped, it will affect them big time. Basically, many people will die in the cold if they doesn't have this cheap energy coming from Russia. The banking infrastructure, which includes the foreign currency payment, the bank should be able to transfer foreign currency. Okay, or if you take the domestic currency, they should be able to give you foreign currency, or if you get foreign currency, they should be able to transfer it back to domestic currency. So that becomes important. Otherwise, the exporters and the importers both will suffer. The exporters will not be able to uh, get the domestic currency because they might have been paid in the foreign currency, and the importers will not have the cash to buy goods from foreign companies. The method of payment, again, we'll talk in length about the method of payment. There are things like cash in advance, letter of credit, um, it can be a bank draft, bank guarantee, and so on. There are different methods of payments which are being used as far as international transaction is concerned. Document exchange, sometimes it's not currency, but it's document exchange. It's like a promise that the payment would be made. Branch infrastructure, the existence of branches and access to automated teller machine, those are important because they help you do business and they smooth up your operation, everyday operation. So those are some banking infrastructure which are important, and they are part of the logistics infrastructure for different countries, where companies from other countries can go and operate. There are some business services which are required for movement of goods. They are freight forwarders, custom brokers, couriers, packing services, multiple other services like the delivery service, good international trade practices, because that's important for export and import. Now, freight forwarders are required because many of these um, many of the international shipment of goods requires a lot of documentation, like the export license, export mm, uh, customs duty paper, the Incoterms, which we will talk about later on in this course. So freight forwarder basically helps to prepare those documents. They help to identify the right carrier. They help to identify the right storage location and so on. So those are the freight forwarders. The brokers help to clear the customs and prepare the documentation as well. Okay, so the couriers we have already discussed. There are different packaging services because international freight, they go through different carriers. they require better package so that the goods are not damaged, and there are companies who specialize in those packaging activities. The distribution channel: when a company enters a country, they rely on the existing distribution channel. So for example, a lubricant manufacturer, they enter a Asian country, so probably they will try to identify mm, the distribution channel for complementary product. Say a distribution channel for tire, or distribution channel for uh, gasoline or gas or petroleum, whatever they use there. So they rely on the existing distribution channel. Okay, so that's, if that is there, they can work much faster. They can use the existing channel to sell their product. Then advertising and promotion: what type of advertising they should use to reach out to consumer. It can be newspaper, television, radio, though now it's mostly internet advertising, like using Facebook, like Twitter, and other social media tools like Google advertising and so on. Trade shows: companies, they participate in trade shows so that they can promote their product. Court infrastructure: if there is a conflict between two parties, the court infrastructure is needed. Now, the speed at which the problem is resolved, that's important. Um, the court is also needed for arbitration and mediation. Though mediation is not exactly a court, that is a third party who intervenes and try to resolve the issue. And for arbitration, a arbitration panel is established who try to arbitrate and resolve the issue. Intellectual property: say McDonald's give their intellectual property to a third party, they franchise it to a third party to use their intellectual property to prepare some food items which they do. So they should be rest assured that the intellectual property law in that country restricts that company or the franchisee to misutilize whatever whatever right or whatever intellectual property um, McDonald's has given them. So that's important. Like um, Microsoft has lost a lot of business in Asia because of this intellectual property. There is rampant piracy. Their softwares are broken, or they are copied, and they are sold in the gray market. International agreement between two countries to a big extent affect this intellectual property. Um, the guideline, the the boundaries within which they operate. The standard infrastructure, like a company is making a product, um, say in US, they want to launch that in Europe. So Europe can have their different standards for that particular product. So company has to understand what are the safety regulation, and they might have to modify the product based on that. And that's true for designing a product, like a plug, simple plug, which is used in US, that may not be suitable to be used in Europe or in Asia. So they have to be modified. So these standard infrastructure does affect international logistics. Now this shows that um, the tire pressure monitoring, which is used in Brazil. Now, what is the significance of this is, now each of these, the axles are called SL, individual single axle load. Now different road infrastructure has got different regulation of how much axle pressure or tire pressure they allow. Okay, so when a truck is moving from one country to another, so it's moving from US to Mexico or from US to Canada, they have to keep in mind that two different countries can have different regulation, which in turn will affect how much the trucks can carry. So the payload is the load which the trucks carry, that might differ. So this becomes important as far as highway infrastructure is concerned. So the chapter ends here. We had a quick review of what are the different aspects of logistics infrastructure. Now, we have probably talked about this before in some other courses, in some other chapter, but over here we have in just few slides we have summed up what are the different infrastructures which are related with logistics activities. So we end the chapter here. Again, thank you for listening to my presentation.